One lie about a forgotten birthday, and the family collapsed faster than a house under a bulldozer. The cost of a $50 gift turned out to be the cost of an entire life. The birthday lie. Morning in Portland began with rain drumming on the roof of the supermarket where Tom worked. He sat at the register, scanning purchases: bread, milk, a pack of pasta. Numbers flickered across the screen. His fingers moved mechanically, but his thoughts were far away, in the basket of unpaid bills and the hollow of his empty wallet. He knew perfectly well what day it was, his daughter's birthday. Her face flashed before him, laughing eyes, and yesterday's question, "Daddy, will the cake have strawberries?" But Tom had already decided to forget. A party would cost a couple of $100, the gift even more. He convinced himself a little lie would save the budget. Tomorrow he could suddenly remember. At home, Lisa was making breakfast. Their daughter sat at the table, coloring a sheet with crayons. On the page was a giant cake, so huge the house roof crumbled under it, while her parents appeared like tiny figures beside it. She stopped, looking at the drawing, and for a second felt a chill. She picked up her phone and typed a message to her husband. "Maybe we can just have a little celebration at home. Just tea, candles, and her favorite music." The reply came a few minutes later, and nothing more. That evening, Tom came home carrying a bag with frozen pizza. He paused in the hallway, his shoes leaving wet marks on the carpet, and began arguing with himself. "Nothing serious. Tomorrow I'll buy a gift. Today I'm tired." The pizza thawed in his hands, cheese dripping onto the floor, and the sight made him smirk. "Tom, do you even know what day it is?" Lisa asked, looking straight into his eyes. He feigned surprise, lifted his brows. "Damn, completely slipped my mind," he muttered, trying to lace his voice with regret. Their daughter ran in and held up her drawing, the same giant cake pressed down on the little house. Tom felt a stab of guilt, but hid it behind a strained smile. "Beautiful! I'll make it up tomorrow, I promise." But the little lie had already taken root. A crack, almost invisible, began to spread across the glass of their family. The next day, Lisa stood at the stove, cooking dinner. She had bought fresh pasta and wanted to create a family evening. No candles, just togetherness. But Tom called from work. He was stuck on his shift. Dinner cooled on the table, and their daughter fell asleep on the couch, waiting for her father. Lisa put the food in the fridge, feeling an inner weariness spreading like frost. 2 days later, she tried again. A budget talk. They sat in the kitchen, bills and a calculator beside them. Lisa carefully raised the subject of holidays, suggested doing without gifts, just candles and tea. Tom nodded absent-mindedly and mumbled, "Later, Liz," then went to the living room to watch TV. Again later, again an empty seat beside her. The third attempt was simpler. She wanted to listen to music with him. She played an old album, poured wine. Tom sat down, but within 5 minutes remembered something to check in the garage. Lisa remained alone, her glass cooling in her hand. Unable to bear it, she called her sister. Carol lived alone in a neat house on the outskirts. In her living room stood porcelain dolls, each in its own glass case. When Lisa arrived, Carol was rearranging them in a row. "There, the jury's ready," she said with a smirk. "Now, let's hear your complaints." Lisa sat and quietly told her about the forgotten birthday, about later, about every step meeting a wall. Carol listened, adjusting dolls as if they really were judges. "You still think he's forgetful?" she said at last. "No, he's sabotaging you, methodically." "Carol, maybe he's just tired?" Lisa tried to object. "Tired men don't forget children," her sister cut off, fixing a doll's hat. "Start recording everything. Don't trust memory. Paper's better." Back home, Lisa pulled a notebook from a drawer. On the first page, she wrote, "Forgot birthday." Below, "Dinner ruined, bills postponed, candles and tea ignored." Trifles, perhaps, but each line weighed heavier on paper than in her thoughts. Closing the notebook, she felt she was holding not just notes, but a list already reshaping her family. Tom increasingly came home on edge. Evenings grew tense. Lisa spoke little, kept her phone in hand, sometimes leaving for groceries and returning later than usual. More than once, Tom saw her step into the hallway to answer a message, closing the door behind her. At first, he tried to believe it was just fatigue, but soon a picture of infidelity formed in his mind. He sat in his car outside, staring at dark windows, thinking, who is she seeing? Once, he dared ask directly, "Liz, is everything okay? You're different." She cast him a quick look and said flatly, "I'm fine, just tired." But her eyes slid away. Tom noticed, said nothing, but suspicion thickened. At work, he confided in a colleague, Martin, a lanky guy always chewing sandwiches at the register. "If a woman hides her phone, brace yourself," Martin said. "Saw it 5 times on cable shows. 3 of them were mine." He chuckled. "Want the truth? Hire a PI, like calling a plumber. Costly, but he'll find the leak." The thought stuck. That evening, Tom saw an ad in the paper. Private investigations, confidential. The office was above an old laundromat. Narrow stairs, peeling walls. Inside sat a short man with a pale face and a crossword in his lap. "Harris," he introduced himself. "So, what's the case?" Tom laid down a photo of Lisa. "I want to know who she's meeting." Harris clicked his pencil. "Lover or lawyer? Both 5 letters, he said dryly. "We'll check." Meanwhile, Lisa saw Carol more often. Her sister urged her to back up evidence. "Photos, receipts, anything that might be useful," Carol said, adjusting a doll in its case. "And maybe give Tom a little lesson. Show him he's not to be trifled with." Lisa nodded, not fully grasping what Carol meant, but the notebook of failures filled quickly. Thin lines, growing heavier. A week later, Harris called, voice as dry as a radio crackle. "Come my, I've got material." Tom left work early, hands trembling as he started the truck. His mind raced with possibilities, secret dates, shady deals. The staircase to the office reeked of damp and detergent. Harris pushed a manila envelope across the desk without lifting his eyes from the crossword. "Take a look, easy as a 7-letter word on D." Inside was a stack of grainy photos. Lisa in a coat entering a cafe, sitting at a table. Across from her, a man in a suit with a briefcase. In one frame, she leaned in, listening. In another, she adjusted her hair. In a third, the man handed her a pen, their fingers almost touching. Tom froze. His heart pounded so hard the photos shook in his hands. "So that's how it is," he whispered. Harris tapped one picture with his pencil. "See? An anagram. Lover and lawyer. 1 letter apart in your head. In life, the difference could cost you everything. But for Tom, it was already clear. Gestures too intimate, smiles too soft, rage boiled inside him. They met 3 times, Harris added, always the same spot. What they discussed, I didn't hear. My ears are tuned for 4-letter words, starts with S, ends with M. Tom wasn't listening. He saw only betrayal. Meanwhile, Carol made her own move. She bought a cheap pendant at the pawn shop. That night, while Tom's pickup sat by the house, she slipped close and tossed the trinket under the seat. "Let them see who he really is," she muttered, pulling her coat tight. Photographs, pendant, words of others, all linked into a chain Tom couldn't control. Each piece pulled him further from the truth. Evening. The house was too quiet. Their daughter sat at the kitchen table, drawing hearts with a marker. The lines came out crooked, red blotches staining the cloth like evidence at a crime scene. Tom pulled a frozen pizza from the fridge, laid it on a plate without waiting for the oven. Cheese melted, dripping onto the floor. He placed the plate beside an envelope. His insides churned. He couldn't wait anymore. "Well, what's this supposed to mean?" Tom threw the photos on the table. The images scattered among Lisa's discount coupons. One picture of the suited man lay beside an ad for 30% off detergent. The farce looked absurd, but Tom was livid. Lisa froze. She picked up one photo, the man offering her a pen. "You think he's my lover?" she asked, quietly, her voice trembling. "What else should I think?" Tom's voice rose. 3 meetings, the same guy? She took a deep breath, gripped the edge of the table. "He's a lawyer, Tom. I was discussing divorce. You want the truth? There it is." Her words carried no drama, only exhaustion. "I tried talking to you. About money, about our daughter, even just dinner. Every time I got the same answer. Later. My whole life turned into your later." Their daughter crawled under the table in fear, marker still in hand. The commotion drew their downstairs neighbor, Mr. Handley, a retiree in a tank top. He barged in with a flashlight. "What's going on here? Civic duty says I step in." He tried to separate them, but knocked the microwave, shattering its glass. The kitchen filled with the crash of shards. Someone had already called the police. When officers arrived, they asked questions. One went to Tom's truck and returned with the pendant. "Is this yours?" he asked. Tom opened his mouth, but no words came. He had never seen it before, yet Lisa's eyes had already read the answer. The scene ended with police radio squawking, their daughter crying, and cheese dripping onto the floor. The little lie had grown into a police report. Weeks later, Tom's house looked like evidence. Empty pizza boxes on the kitchen counter, a court notice pinned to the wall, domestic dispute, property damage, neighbor intervention. Police imposed temporary restrictions on his contact with Lisa and their daughter. One night, he even lost his driver's license, refused a sobriety test, though he had drunk only a few swigs of cheap whiskey. Papers now spoke louder than he did. The divorce moved fast, like a runaway train. Lisa and her daughter stayed with Carol. Tom shuttled between lawyers. His attorney was a specialist in bankruptcies and stand-up comedy. He cracked jokes even in the darkest talks. "You see," he said, flipping through papers, "most of my clients have yachts. You, just a $50 cake. Still an asset, though. Liquid, you know. Liquid 'cause it melts." He laughed at his own pun. Tom clenched his fists. Every day brought new bills, court costs, alimony, fines. Bank letters piled up on the nightstand. Friends turned away, co-workers whispered. Tom sat in an empty living room. Even the TV sold, and realized the little lie had become a pit of debt. But Lisa felt no victory. She stood at her sister's window, holding a mug of cold tea. Her daughter played on the floor, stacking blocks into tall towers that toppled instantly. She watched and knew. Their new life stood on shaky ground. She had gained freedom, but also emptiness. At night, she dreamed of that drawing, the giant cake crushing the house. Now she knew the walls had truly cracked, and no lawyer could glue them back. The price of truth was unbearable for both. Tom lost his home and family. Lisa lost the belief that it had ever meant anything. A year passed. Tom lived in a cheap Portland motel. The room smelled of damp and cleanser. Outside, a neon vacancy sign flickered red, deceptively warm. On the nightstand lay a stack of papers, the newest, a court letter, fine for the neighbor incident. The phrasing was cold and sharp, like a diagnosis. That evening, Tom pulled a small cupcake from a bag, set it on a plastic plate, and stuck a thin candle into it. The lighter clicked, the flame flickered, lighting the peeling walls. "Happy birthday, kiddo." He closed his eyes, tried to imagine her laughter, her clapping hands, but the picture blurred. Inside remained only silence. From outside came the flutter of wings. Pigeons perched on the ledge, and Tom thought of Harris with his crosswords and anagram quips. In the dark, the birds looked identical, like random letters that never spelled family. He rose, went to the window. Across the street, in the pawn shop's dusty window, stood a porcelain doll in a lace dress, gaze mocking. Tom thought of Carol, her jury of dolls, and smirked. The candle burned low, wax dripping on the napkin. He blew it out, and the room sank into half-darkness. The air smelled of smoke and sugar. He sat on the bed, looked at the fine notice, and rasped, "Saved 50, spent everything else." The words hung in the void. There was nothing more to say.